want to talk today about a trend that I've been seeing with young slash new parents. I've been told by those more in the know that the term for this is called gentle parenting. But the gist of it is that these parents, often with young children under the age of 5 or under the age of 10, are trying to reason with their kids, trying to explain to them why their decisions are not correct. Actually, even saying that they're trying to explain it to them is perhaps being a bit generous, because they're explaining it in terms that an adult would understand, but a kid doesn't have the context or even the vocabulary to really understand what the parent is saying. But it seems that the idea is that if you just talk to your kids and explain to them why what they're doing is wrong, they'll stop doing it. And I certainly understand where this is coming from. I certainly understand the desire to find a way to parent your kids without using any sort of punishment. I've been a parent myself, and I know the heartbreak that you feel when your child looks at you with just seething hatred on their beautiful little face. Either because you've told them that they can't have something they want, or because you've in some way explained to them that they can't have the ice cream because they've already eaten it all and there's none left. The point is that kids don't have that kind of context to understand the world like adults do. And that's essentially what these parents are doing. They're trying to treat their children like adults. I understand treating your kids like people. That's a good thing. But you need to treat them like people who have only been alive for 5 years, who have only had language for 3, who barely have control over their limbs, much less greater cognitive thinking or abstract concepts. They're just not capable of those things. If you're going to talk to them, you need to talk to them on their level. And by and large, trying to talk to them is not the right approach. One of the things that struck me when I had very young kids, when my kids were just a couple of months old, was the concept of swaddling. We were taught from the nurses in the hospital how to swaddle our children, to wrap them up tight in a blanket. And what that was given to us as a means of comforting them. And in fact, that's exactly the effect that we saw. The kids would be unswaddled, be lying on the table, have all of their needs essentially met in every other way, but their limbs would be flying about and they would be very distressed. And once you swaddled them up, once you wrapped them up like a burrito and tightened them so that they couldn't move, they calmed right down. And this was curious to me because it didn't make sense to me. As an adult, I'm thinking, why would you feel more calm by being restricted like that? To my mind, I would rather have the freedom of my limbs. I would rather be able to affect my environment. And if you're going to completely bind me up like some kind of a mental patient, I would feel, perhaps even a little bit claustrophobic, or feel like I was in danger and I wouldn't be able to protect myself. But for the infant, that makes them feel safe. And of course, it's pretty easy to imagine that this has something to do with the womb, right? That they've just spent 9 months in the womb, and every time they pushed their hands out, they felt that resistance. And I think either instinctively or by association, they start to associate that they start to associate that feeling of restriction that they feel when they push their limbs out and they feel something pushing them back, that restraint is associated with safety. that if they can't feel that restraint, then they are not safe from the outside world. Somehow, even as infants, they are instinctively aware that the outside world is scary and can hurt them. And if they feel that cocoon, then they feel like they are protected from that world. And all infants start out this way. Now, of course, by the time they get to the end of schooling, they're, pushing out against every restraint we try to place on them. But that's a 20-year transition. They start off wanting that restraint, wanting to feel secured and held and feel that restriction around them, and then they end up wanting to be free of those restrictions. But that's a transitive process to get from one to the other over that same time period. You start seeing the real midpoint of that transition right around 12 or 13. But when they're young, they very much need that restriction. And as they get older, the restriction of the actual physical fabric holding their limbs becomes less of an issue, but psychologically you still see it playing out. They want to have rules that they know are unbreakable. They want to have some kind of restraint placed around them. And if they don't, then they don't feel safe. If you give them the sandbox and say, don't go outside these boundaries, then they are happy to play in that sandbox. And they're going to test their boundaries, just like they push against the swaddling. They're going to try to go out of the sandbox, and they're going to look at you. And they're going to see what you're going to do about it. And if you enforce it, they might throw a little bit of a fit. They might be like, but but they're still, but I've completely thrown myself off with my own tantrum. They're going to throw a little bit of a fit, but then they're going to immediately come right down, because that is what they're looking for. When they push against those restraints, they want to feel the pushback. And these parents that are trying to use logic and reason to help their 3 to 5-year-olds learn to obey, they're just refusing to give their children what they want. They're refusing to give their children that sense of safety, that sense of restraint, and that mom and dad, if they are restricting me, then they are protecting me, and they want to feel those boundaries. And to be honest, some part of us never outgrows that. There are still people, even in their 30s and 40s, that, when given complete freedom, start to freak out. So it's something that never really goes away, but it's certainly not something that you want to take from a 3 to 5-year-old. Anyway, if you like what you hear, head on over to humanownersmanual.org. That is my site, and you can find articles about this or other topics, as well as support me financially if that's something you want to do. Thanks.